This video is about whether you can be a consulting arborist without having done tree work. In a nutshell, yes, but there's no real substitute for having done some of the work, right? You can partner with people, you can be very humble and trust people's opinions, but there's always going to be a little bit of a difference and an improvement if you were able to do the work yourself. So whether that's doing PHC work, because you might be reviewing tree diseases and pest problems and making recommendations for treatment. So if you've done the work before, you know better what's out there or how it's done. If you're writing pruning specifications, it's nice to have done the pruning or seen how the tree responded year after year. Or if you're looking at the integrity of branches and things like that, to have been up in the tree and been intimate, in a PC way, intimate with different branches and structures, right? If you don't have that experience, that doesn't mean you can't be a consulting arborist. You do have to make up that hands-on experience in different ways. So that could be education, being very voracious in your appetite for knowledge, going to tons of conferences, and I think the biggest one would be working under another consulting arborist who knows what they're doing. You can obviously also do this yourself, but it's gonna be a much bigger struggle. So I think of the traditional route into being a consulting arborist kind of like an end of career stage, where there's a lot of tree workers who have progressed into different aspects of tree work, and finally at some point their knowledge is what's more valuable than the actual work themselves. I do know a lot of consulting arborists who have owned tree companies, sold them, and then became independent consultants, or they're consulting within their own companies. But not everyone has followed that route. There are others who have gone and gotten higher education, and they even write a lot of the references in our industry. So there's different routes for sure. Nowadays, I think consulting is recognized more as its own career path. So not necessarily something that you fall into as you get more experience, but rather you can choose to do it. And that's what happened for me. When I was in college, I already knew I wanted to be an arborist. I was thinking city arborist at that point, but a local consulting arborist came to give a talk at my class, and I shadowed them for a little bit and ultimately decided that's what I want to do. I have 3 different perspectives, including my own. For me, I have both a bachelor's and a master's degree in a relevant field in horticulture. I've been pursuing this path for a long time, and all my education is directly related to being an arborist or a consulting arborist. After college, I worked briefly for a tree service doing inventory, and then I meant to get into tree work because I didn't realize that that was an option, and that didn't last very long for personal back injury reasons. So I immediately went into consulting under my boss because he happened to also be doing consulting. Here and there, I've done tree work. I've worked with the crew, and it's not much though. I think it adds up to about a month over my entire career. It was very helpful for me. The reason why I really wish that I could have done more of it is both personal, right? I highly value hands-on experience and hands-on skills, which I don't have a ton of, but I also value getting your hands dirty, doing manual labor, things like that, and not everyone values that. So I couldn't say necessarily that that's strictly what you need versus it's strictly what I feel like I wanted. But when I was on the crew, just little things like dragging the brush of this particular species, seeing how branches fail, feeling the weight of wood, all of that gave me so much knowledge. But I think the difference is I was already an arborist, I was already a consulting arborist, already had such a humongous framework that the pace at which I learned stuff was way faster than anyone else. Compared to another groundsman, right, who doesn't have any background, I'm going to learn way faster than them. So I think my experience is not necessarily normal either. I know that I have this knowledge gap. I will never be so arrogant as to not listen to the experience of tree workers. The second experience I have is from another consulting arborist, very similar in experience to me, also has started running her business relatively recently in the past 5 to 6 years or so. She has a college degree in a non-science field. Then she got an associate's degree in a science field and primarily worked under another consulting arborist. Day in, day out, he reviewed her work, had all these ways of setting her up to learn all the information that I learned in school. Her perspective is doing consulting work with trees is not the same as tree work. We're in the same industry, but we're not competing, and we're working in parallel, right? So just like a consulting arborist may not necessarily want to do tree work, a tree worker may not necessarily want to do consulting, at least in the way that a full-time consulting arborist would be doing it. I know a lot of tree workers who choose to work in trees because they enjoy being outside, right? They don't want to be in an office. And then there are people who maybe physically are not capable of doing tree work, and they find the mental work of consulting very stimulating, and it suits their particular skill set. So there is not necessarily going to be an overlap in both interest and capabilities and skills. In her opinion, it's not necessary at all, and she has never had this feeling that I have that she wanted to do tree work. The last perspective I have is another consulting arborist who has a similar level of education to me. So he had a bachelor's in science and a master's in forestry. He first worked for a tree nonprofit, then as the arborist for a city, and now is also independent. His perspective is that while it's nice to have a consulting arborist who has had that field experience, you're probably not going to get them. There's fewer and fewer of those consulting arborists, and they're going to be in more demand, right? And you may not necessarily want to wait for their schedule or pay their fees for a standard consultation or a standard development project. Those people exist as long as they're willing to take on your project. Consulting arborists towards the end of their career are getting more and more picky about the jobs that they take on. In our area, there just aren't enough consulting arborists to do all the work that's out there. You could get a very similar product, at least for what you need, from someone with less experience who can still do the work. For most construction-related projects, for example, you don't need that person who has done all the tree work. It is a different skill set, it's a different knowledge base. You're not talking so much about pruning or the nuances of removal. You're looking more at how is this project going to affect my trees. And there are people like myself who have that experience, having done consulting for all these years under someone else. Some final thoughts on the situation. If you are someone who wants to do consulting in the future and you're able to do tree work, that would be awesome. But if you don't want to do tree work or you just can't, then there's certain things I would recommend. Start going to workshops, start investing in your education, whether that's buying books, learning as much stuff as you can from reputable sources online. Find a good mentor, ideally someone that you're working under, and you want to work with them for as long as possible. I felt like it took about 6 years before I felt very comfortable being on my own. Your mileage may vary if you're just a confident person, but overconfidence can be a problem as well. Lastly, just continue being humble and learning from a variety of people, especially tree workers, to make up for the knowledge that you don't have. Maintain critical thinking in these particular situations. Don't necessarily challenge or doubt people right off the bat, but think about it critically. And just expand your network. You know, the more people you know, the bigger the perspectives and knowledge base and experience you'll be able to draw from when you actually need help. Again, reiterating, go to as much training as possible, especially things are offered by ASCA, the Consulting Academy, consulting conferences. That's where you're going to meet other people like yourself and maybe find a mentor, maybe find people who are hiring, and be able to get access to the people that you need to train you and guide you into this career.